This gospel obviously is not directed at you. This is directed at leadership. Jesus had been wrestling and fighting with the priesthood, the temple priesthood, and they were his main opponents. By the time Matthew wrote this gospel 50 years later or more, the temple priesthood was on the run. Don't forget, Jerusalem had been destroyed. There was no temple, there was no altar. Therefore, there was people called priests. Anybody whose name is Cohen today is a descendant of the temple priesthood. But there's no more priesthood functioning in the Jewish religion. So Matthew writes his gospel with the problems of his own day in mind. And he's probably directing these remarks, and a lot of them would be directed towards the Pharisees, that special group of Jewish leadership which were strict constructionists when it came to the law. Now, many of these Pharisees had become Christian, but they carried over with them their mentality towards the law. And so they were trying to impose on Christians all kinds of regulatory things which they had brought with them from Judaism. And that's who he's really arguing with here. But now, 2,000 years later, you and I have to read this gospel and make practical applications in our own time. We're not worried about the Jewish priesthood. We're not worrying about the Pharisee party because they've pretty much become extinct. I guess their successors would be the Hasidic Jews, the very strict constructionists in Judaism today. But in our own Christian community, we have leaders. And one of the differences is that in our other forms of life together, in our political life, in our government, in our constitutional way of living, if our leaders are messing up or widening their phylacteries or their fringes and taking the first seats, we can get rid of them because we vote them in. But what do we do within the community, which is the church? Because we have a leadership in our church. It's, as far as we can understand, it's the will of Jesus that we have this kind of leadership, that we have leaders at all, bishops, that whole thing. And as we have experienced in the past, sad to say, 20 years, some of that leadership has let us down. What do we do about that? Well, we take it to prayer initially. But I think sometimes it's incumbent upon Christians to speak out. Because together we are carrying the message of, together, the whole church is carrying the message of Jesus to the present day world. And in some places there has been scandalous behavior by leadership in the church. It's cost a lot of money. It certainly has cost us great embarrassment. And unfortunately, in many cases, it has brought about a loss in faith. I think of Ireland. I mean, at Mass attendance at Ireland, which was like super high. Daily Mass in Ireland used to look like Sunday Mass here because they're scandalized at the remiss behavior of their leaders. I think our church as a whole has to become a more transparent body as far as leadership is concerned. And I think the members of the church, which is most of us, I mean, the membership is everybody. And by the way, there's 1 billion of us today in the world, 1 billion Catholics. Can you imagine? They're not all in one place, thank goodness. But I think we have to begin to voice in a polite, respectful way our discontent, our questions, some accountability. I think we have to have the courage to do that. Almost everybody in this room grew up in a generation in which we were very subservient to people in authority, and that includes not only church people. That meant the policeman on the corner, the doctor in the office, anybody who had a position of authority. Perhaps it's time to change that, to move on from that, to become a more demanding of our leadership, not only in Washington, but in all places. I'm not here to foment revolt. I don't think I'm strong enough to lead a revolt. But I do think as Christians we have to be honest to God, to Jesus, if the church is going to fulfill its mission. And right now I feel handicapped in many ways in fulfilling the mission, because there was a point where I took off my collar and wouldn't go into a supermarket with a collar on because I was embarrassed. So, just these remarks. The Pharisees are a thing of the past, for the most part. The temple priesthood is not our problem. We have to live where we are, love where we are, and work where we are. And that takes courage. So may God give us the courage to keep the Church of Christ the vanguard of the kingdom and the face of Jesus.